I will make a prediction. I don't think it's necessarily particularly right.
Okay.
I think it will be a Conservative minority government.
Okay.
But I quite honestly have to say I think there are that is one of about 4 credible options really in my view.
There's been a lot of talk about possibility of a hung parliament. Are the Tories right? Would it be devastating for Britain for that scenario?
I think that depends on what sort of hung parliament we get. That if it was made up of, say, parties who hadn't done very well, supposing, I don't think the Lib Dems are going to do badly, supposing both Labour and the Lib Dems did badly, and then tried to hang on by both working together, I think you'd have a government with a lot of lack of confidence, and that sort of hung parliament might not be good. If you had a strong working relationship with 2 parties that actually could give relatively strong government as well as what one might say reasonably sort of popular government, I think that would be a good thing. I will say this, I think what is a pity that is among the options in this country is not the option of a grand coalition by the 2 major parties, like for instance we had in Germany a couple of years ago that actually worked quite well. And the reason is it's incredible, but the reason is that in 1931 Labour, Ramsay MacDonald, the Labour Prime Minister, formed a national coalition with the Tories, and most of his party deserted him, and Labour were out of office until 1945. And somehow, even to people who weren't around at that time, and there are probably actually not many people who are adults at that time now, even to people who aren't around, it's a folk memory that has persisted, and that's why I don't think the Tories would dreadfully be interested in collaborating with Labour, but I think Labour would never risk another 1931, and I think that's a bit of a tragedy, because not that necessarily would be the right answer, but it's a pity. It limits the number of possible answers we could have in a hung parliament. So,
but is there a case, as Nick Clegg has been saying, that it is time for electoral reform?
Yes, I do think so. That obviously, if we get a lopsided result, that will obviously be something that should be considered. I think electoral reform is not this is my personal view, of course.
Sure.
I think it is not the only option. I think one that possibly should be thought of is a reform of the House of Lords, which would get a proportional element there. So a government with an overall majority could still get its day-to-day business done, but it would mean that on certain issues a proportional PR-based House of Lords would have the opportunity of have some control over what the government did.
Would you say the current process is undemocratic?
It has to be. I mean, you're thinking of the House of Lords, are you? Or
well, I'm of just the current electoral system.
Not necessarily, because I think there are 2 ways of looking at it. All right, you can get a system now that could produce different results, although in fact virtually all the results it's produced up till now have been relatively fair. The party with the most votes has formed the government, and in fact the 1951, which a lot of people refer to as a classic case where it didn't, in fact that was for the fact that the Tories didn't have candidates in as many seats as Labour, and also 4 Tory MPs in Northern Ireland, which in those days was strongly Tory, were returned unopposed, so they didn't have. So in fact I don't think 1951 was a good. But looking at it from, if we did have proportional representation, the thing that does bother me a bit you could get minor parties acting as kingmakers. Now, you might say that with a party like the Lib Dems, that would be a good thing. But remember, under a proportional system, you open yourselves open. It might not be the nice Lib Dems. We can think of all sorts of not very nice parties who could actually become sort of the people who decide. Like, for instance, in Austria. I mean, who I think have a PR system, I think like Germany. And of course, you've seen the Freedom Party has actually gained a bit of a stranglehold on some occasions.
Yes. Okay, and just finally, are you a football fan?
Not really, but I do support this team. My son supports, and it lost.
Who's that?
It's Arsenal that has failed
to
win the Premiership. Yeah.
But what about the World Cup? Will you be following that in any shape or form?
Oh yes, no, I will.
What's your prediction for the final? What two teams are going to be in the final?
No, I'm not sure at all, but I would hope that England was one of them.
Okay, do you hope, but do you think England will be?
I just don't know, because so many years when one's sort of written them off, they've still got quite a long way into it, and other years when you would have thought they wouldn't have had, they would have done very well. I, of course, am old enough to remember the last time they did win the World Cup. A dwindling 66. Yes, a dwindling band of people.
Stop stopping.